Welcome to Element, the place where myth meets reality. A huge, measuring up to 20 kilometers tall, twice the size of Everest, and approximately 200 kilometers thick, can be seen running exactly along the equator of Lepidus for well over 3/4 of the Moon's entire circumference. Why do so many employees from space programs and researchers believe that our solar system is full of artificially made structures? This should no longer be taboo. Our solar system is fascinating, to say the least, and there is still so much we don't know about it. What makes one even more curious is knowing the organizations and people who operate at the highest levels of security clearances probably know a whole lot more. That being said, if you're independently curious, there are more than enough resources available to satisfy your curiosity. You will find a way to investigate. At the very least, you could get access to the best telescope you have and stare at the other planets, our moon and the moons of other planets. Perhaps the best thing to do is simply sift through the literature, and you will find no shortage of strange anomalies that have been discovered in space. There's truly no shortage. It's also likely you will come across the tremendous amounts of controversy that come with these discoveries as well. Strange findings have been subject to ridicule within the mainstream, but that hasn't stopped hundreds, if not thousands of researchers and insiders from all backgrounds from continuing their study and education. The face on Mars is a good example of anomalies and ridicule. It has been the subject of several published papers that clearly show a high chance of artificial construction. Carl Sagan was even accused by his colleague, physicist and NASA astronaut Dr. Brian O'Leary, for covering up the fact that they knew the face on Mars was artificial. Today, it's a much different story, and it appears that there is no doubt that life once flourished on Mars prior to the massive climate shift which occurred there that made it what it is today. Not many people know that Mars was once very Earth-like, with vast oceans, mountain ranges, and greenery. Little did we know that there may have been a very intelligent civilization there, and still might be, perhaps within it. A paper published in the journal Scientific Exploration was one of the latest to examine the Cydonia region on Mars. As the authors point out, it validates the earlier measurements obtained using the lower resolution NASA Viking images, which hinted strongly at artificial surface interventions. The key word there is artificial surface interventions. There are pyramids and faces on Mars, similar and, in some cases, larger than those found here on Earth. Then we have the Moon, which has also been the subject of recent peer-reviewed research. On more than one occasion, researchers have found what appears to be strange and large artificial structures on the backside of the Moon, the side we can never see unless we send probes and astronauts around it. To complement all of the information regarding the Moon, we have statements from a number of credible sources in the form of witness testimony, from high-ranking intelligence and military people, etc. It's safe to say that something strange is happening on the Moon. I do believe we went there, but I also believe what we were shown and told was heavily sanitized. Let's not forget about Buzz Aldrin being so outspoken about a monolith on the, or one of the, moons of Mars. Which brings me to the topic of this article, Lapetus, one of Saturn's moons. What's unique about it is the fact that it has what appears to be a huge mountainous ridge that measures up to 20 kilometers tall, twice the size of Everest, and approximately 200 kilometers thick. It can be seen running exactly along the equator for well over 3/4 of the Moon's entire circumference. But it's safe to assume around the entire body. It was discovered in 2004, early in the Cassini mission. First, let me set the stage. Lapetus is bizarre in a lot of ways. It has a yin-yang surface of dark and bright material. It is unexpectedly flat, pole to pole. It seems to have an excessive number of large impact basins, and it has a mountainous ridge up to 20 kilometers tall running exactly along its equator for well over 3/4 of its entire circumference. The existence of this ridge was revealed very early in the Cassini mission, in an encounter at the end of 2004. A number of prominent researchers and scientists have hypothesized that our own moon is artificial in nature. Read more about that in the links provided above, as so they have done with other moons, like Lapetus. That being said, we don't hear much about these theories and the credibility of the people behind them. They're completely ignored by the mainstream simply because they don't fit within the mainstream narrative, which is nothing more than a theory in itself. When talking about Saturn in general, Norman Berggren comes to mind. Dr. Berggren has worked for Amos Research Laboratory, NACA, or the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, and Lockheed Missiles and Space Company, now known as Lockheed Martin. He then went on to found Berggren Engineering and Research. You can view some of his publications for NASA, where he worked for more than a decade, here. He states that something extraterrestrial could be creating the rings of Saturn in an interesting interview with Project Camelot. In the interview, he also reveals images he has seen regarding the moon landings and an extraterrestrial presence. He referred to them as tall black people, very dark. Moving back to Lapetus, Jim Mars points out in his Our Occulted History that it's one of the moons of Saturn that's considered by many researchers to be artificial. He writes, Lapetus, the planet's third largest moon, has puzzled researchers since its discovery by Italian astronomer Giovacchino Domenico Cassini in 1671. Like our own moon, Lapetus is in a near-perfect circular orbit, and one side always faces its planetary host. But even more puzzling are square and hexagonal craters that, according to one former NASA employee, appear to be gigantic artificial planets holding the moon together, making Lapetus resemble nothing so much as the Death Star in George Lucas's film Star Wars. The point is, no one can adequately explain this huge and what appears to be the tallest mountain region in our entire solar system, as far as we know. It's impossible to hypothesize exactly how it was formed, and why it's confined exactly to the equator. The cause of the moon's unusual inclined orbital plane is also completely unknown. This is the common theme you will find among planetary scientists regarding these pictures. Authors Tobias Owen and Donald Goldsmith hypothesized that the unusual moon is the only object in the entire solar system which we might seriously regard as an alien signpost, a natural object deliberately modified by an advanced civilization to attract our attention. The same has been hypothesized again about our own moon, as Carl Sagan once pointed out. It is not out of the question that artifacts of these visits still exist, or even that some kind of base is maintained, possibly automatically, within the solar system to provide continuity for successive expeditions. Because of weathering and the possibility of detection and interference by the inhabitants of the Earth, it would be preferable not to erect such a base on the Earth's surface. The moon seems one reasonable alternative. Forthcoming high-resolution photographic reconnaissance of the moon from space vehicles, particularly of the backside, might bear these possibilities in mind. The deputy manager for the 95 Clementine mission to the moon said it was really a reconnaissance mission to check out the bases on the backside of the moon. Brandon Berg, linked in moon articles above. In 1962, NASA scientist Gordon MacDonald published a paper stating it's more likely that the moon is hollow than not. MIT's Sean C. Solomon furthered this statement, citing knowledge of the moon's gravitation field as evidence for the assertion. So, yes, strange things seem to be going on in our solar system, especially with moons. The name Lapetus is interesting. I often wonder about Greek mythology and other areas like anthropology and how much information has been kept from us. Things are clearly not as we've been told. If we ever openly go to these places in our solar system, we could all imagine jaw-dropping discoveries would be made. Perhaps the black budget world already has made some. Perhaps we're not even allowed up. To add to all the unusualness happening around Saturn, a UFO the size of planet Earth has been seen hovering near Saturn. The pictures NASA got back from the Voyager missions to Saturn in 1980 were apparently so mind-altering that they locked them up. At least, that's what retired US Army Command Sergeant Major Bob Dean said in a lecture. He also showed numerous photographs from the Apollo missions that were never released to the public. You can find these images on NASA's website. Multiple governments like Russia have been calling for an international investigation as to where photographs, footage and moon rocks disappeared to as well. The picture above does not come from Dean. It comes from one of his close friends, Berggren, mentioned above. Berggren played a critical role in NASA's Voyager program. What is the picture of? It's a luminous source that comes from Berggren's book, The Ringmaker of Saturn. He had to go through a lot of trouble to publish it, and had to leave the country in order to do so, as Dean explained in the lecture linked above. The book is now extremely rare and costs thousands of dollars if you can even find it. According to Berggren, there are several large craft proliferating out around Saturn and its moons. His book goes into much greater detail, and although it's hard to find and costs thousands of dollars. According to Dean, Berggren got frustrated later in life that the decision was made not to tell the public what they had photographed at Saturn. My previous article, Longtime NASA Scientist Blows the Whistle on the Tall Black Extraterrestrial Beings, describes Berggren exposing the existence of what he calls extraterrestrial vehicles that were responsible for making the rings around Saturn. In his book, Norman makes it a clear point to emphasize that these objects have probably been around much longer than we have. He also states that if there was any ill intent towards our planet, something probably would have happened by now, and there is a reason that these objects, which he stated are intelligently controlled, not by us, have not come in close proximity to our planet. By coming closer than they already are, they may, and already probably do, have some effects on our own weather. This is something Norman also mentions in his book. This is another reason I believe some of Saturn's moons could be artificially made, simply because of the presence of these giant vehicles, as Berggren calls them. Thanks for choosing Element. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe.